My talk today is on the origin of the grassy biomes of Madagascar, the early movement of hunter-gatherers from the Tanzanian mainland. Obviously, since this is a extremely short talk, I urge you to go and read the proper paper and proper literature if you want to take this topic seriously. Okay, so we all know that there's a huge debate over the origin of the grassy biomes of highland Madagascar. It's highly controversial. Some researchers, the old French tradition was definitely that this was covered in trees and they were burnt off. But more recently, there have been some researchers arguing that these grassy biomes are natural, that they represent a climax vegetation. Alternatively, they were created by burning at the same period when megafaunal extinctions occur. So the exponent of the natural view, by and large, do not take on the problem presented by Bernie and others concerning the rise in carbon around 2,400 years ago. Well, recent papers, such as Godfrey et al. 2019, do espouse an anthropic evidence based on the faunal evidence. So this, in turn, relates to a crucial question: exactly when was Madagascar first settled and by whom? This, by the way, is the sort of appearance of central highland Madagascar these days, with intensive cultivation of rice and an extremely sparse landscape cleared of most natural vegetation. So the last decades have seen a mounting crescendo of increasingly implausible claims concerning the antiquity of the settlement of Madagascar, some of which go back as far as 10,000 years ago. These are inevitably based on highly indirect inferences, notably apparent cut marks on skeletal material in museum collections. Even the one purported find of stone tools, that's the Dewar paper, is conspicuous for its lack of archaeological context and thus plausible dates. Frankly, we have no properly stratified sites. Then one argument is we should dismiss everything before Austronesian contact, which is between 500 and 700 AD onwards. But if that's the case, then we're in trouble. There's a large number of lines of evidence that converge on the fact that there was settlement well before the Austronesians arrived. There's the prevalence of human-modified, i.e. butchered bones of extinct animals, which coincides with a major epoch of megafaunal extinction. There's the appearance of pollen of the introduced Cannabis humulus. There's the sudden increases in microscopic carbon particles above background values, corresponding to massive forest burning from 2400 BP onwards. Moreover, from 0 AD onwards, there's a series of classical references, apparently to Madagascar, culminating in Ptolemy, the Ptolemy geographer, who actually provides clear navigation directions for reaching the island. So there's several papers by Godfrey et al., 1997, but most recently 2019. They summarize our knowledge, particularly of megafaunal extinction, including lemurs. At least 16 species disappeared in the Holocene. Only 3 have extant relatives in the same family, as well as the lemurs, the pygmy hippopotamus, giant tortoises, ratites, and other species die out in the same period. So the 2019 paper argues that the major megafaunal extinctions only occurred with the Austronesian invasions, but this doesn't seem to me to really account for the evidence for early burning and forest clearance. Okay, well, if Madagascar was colonized by pre-Austronesians, who were they? Well, we know that scattered among the Malagasy lived groups of hunter-gatherers, variously known as the Mikea, the Vazimba, or the biomes. Evidently, there's no synchronic ethnographic evidence. It's plausible they crossed the Mozambique Channel at an early date. And looking for information on these people, The major sources are a paper by Johnston Berkeley in 1920, and more particularly Berkeley in 1936, which was published in Madagascar and somewhat difficult to get hold of. But they present quite detailed information on the different groups of Vazimba and biomes, their locations and subsistence strategies. Now, by the time the investigations took place, none of these groups were speaking a non-Austronesian language, but they had a great deal of residual vocabulary, especially plant names, animal names, and so on, which are clearly from some prior source. Berkeley thought that the biomes in particularly were linked to the African mainland, and in particular to the pygmies. The data from the groups called the Vazimba seem to either connect with Malagasy, nothing, or with coastal Bantu, whereas the biomes data seems to have interesting connections with the mainland opposite with central Tanzania. It's just a picture to give you some sense of what the Vazimba looked like. The people called Mikea. This is a wonderful recording of the very striking music of the Mikea people. And here is a small collation of some of the evidence that central Tanzania may indeed be a significant origin of these people. Their languages are the residual hunter-gatherers of central Tanzania who spoke southern Cushitic languages, above all Asaks and Kwadza. Although these are poorly known, the neighboring languages, also southern Cushitic, such as Iraq, are much better documented. So here are a few intriguing comparisons between biomes and the southern Cushitic languages. These are what the Asak people look like today. They pretty much dress, adopted all the conventions of the Maasai-related peoples, the Barabag and so on, who inhabit central Tanzania. Okay, briefly, all claims of various early settlement on Madagascar are false. Multiple lines of evidence converge on the likelihood of hunter-gatherers from the mainland opposite reaching the island by 2400 BP. In a short time, they did major damage to the environment, extinguishing megafauna, burning down a significant amount of highland tree cover. We know that there are introduced rats in particular, but it's not necessarily the case that the rats were introduced by the hunter-gatherers, more probably by Greek traders seeking tortoiseshell and perhaps trading with the now resident foragers. And the probable origin of such foragers was people similar to the residual population of central Tanzania today. Okay, thanks. Special thanks to Kay Williamson Educational Foundation for research funding. Thanks to Martin Walsh, Philip Bojar, and Martin Muls for data and discussions. And I do urge you, of course, to read my serious length presentations.